In the lower districts of Orion Port, hunger could make a person sell memories, blood, even their own name. Acid rain hissed against the neon-covered rooftops as thousands of cargo drones moved through the night sky, like mechanical insects, their red scanning lights cutting through the fog above the station. Deep beneath the upper commerce decks where diplomats and merchants drank imported wine beneath artificial sunlight, Dock District 12 smelled of burnt wiring, engine coolant, and desperation. The marketplace was still crowded despite the late hour. Vendors shouted over each other in half a dozen languages while steam rose from food carts lined along the narrow metal alleyways. Somewhere nearby, an overloaded reactor hummed with an uneven rhythm that vibrated faintly through the floor panels beneath every step. Lyra Vane stood motionless in the middle of the crowd, her hood soaked with rainwater. Her stomach twisted so violently she had stopped noticing the pain nearly 2 days ago. The cold made her fingertips numb, but she still held the small crystal necklace tightly inside her palm, as if letting go of it would erase the last proof that her old life had ever existed. Around her, strangers brushed shoulders without making eye contact. Nobody cared about another starving alien girl in the lower docks. That was the first rule of survival on Orion Port. Keep moving. Don't look weak. Don't get noticed. A loud burst of laughter erupted from the nearest food stand where a heavy-set vendor scraped synthetic meat onto heated flatbread beneath a flickering yellow light. The smell hit her instantly. Salt, grease, pepper oil, real food. Lyra swallowed hard enough to hurt. Her legs almost gave out as she stepped closer to the counter. The vendor barely glanced at her. You buying or staring? He grunted. Slowly, Lyra opened her trembling hand. The crystal necklace glowed faintly blue beneath the market lights, delicate silver lines moving inside the stone like frozen lightning trapped beneath glass. The reaction around her was immediate. Conversation stopped. Even the vendor straightened slightly. 2 men near the alley entrance exchanged cautious looks before quietly walking away. The vendor's eyes narrowed. Where'd you get that? Lyra ignored the question. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Food. Please. Rainwater slid down the side of her face as she carefully placed the necklace onto the counter. The vendor picked it up with surprising gentleness, turning it beneath the light. The blue glow reflected across his scarred fingers. Lady, he muttered quietly, this thing's worth more than this entire block. Lyra stared at the trays of hot food behind him. Then trade me. The vendor looked her up and down for a long moment before leaning closer across the counter. Problem is, he said softly, items like this usually belong to people somebody's looking for. Lyra's heartbeat quickened. She instinctively stepped backward. Too late. 3 figures standing near the edge of the market had already noticed the necklace. Their dark coats carried no station insignias, but everyone in District 12 recognized bounty hunters when they saw them. One of them slowly smiled. The vendor sighed under his breath. You should have sold this someplace smarter. Lyra looked around desperately. Too many people. Too few exits. Her stomach tightened with something colder than hunger now. Fear. The tallest hunter started walking toward her through the crowd. Calm. Patient. Like he already knew she couldn't escape. Lyra lowered her eyes. For one horrible second, she almost considered offering more than the necklace just to eat before they dragged her away. Then a new voice cut through the rain behind her. How much for the food? The entire market seemed to pause again. A man stepped beside her wearing a worn gray work jacket stained with engine grease. Tall, broad shoulders. Human. Water dripped from strands of damp brown hair across his forehead as he placed several credit chips onto the counter without even looking at the necklace. Enough to feed her for a week, he said quietly. The vendor blinked. You know what she's carrying? The human finally glanced at the glowing crystal. Something unreadable flickered across his tired blue eyes before he looked back at Lyra instead. Not at her body, not at her face, just her eyes. Yeah, he said softly. And she's still hungry. The bounty hunters stopped moving the moment the human stepped beside her. Rain drummed softly against the metal roofing above the marketplace, while steam curled upward from the food cart between them. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The tension itself seemed louder than the crowd. The vendor slowly pushed the bowl of hot stew across the counter toward Lyra without taking his eyes off the glowing necklace. You are making a mistake, human, one of the hunters finally said. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. The human ignored him completely. Instead, he picked up the necklace from the counter and gently placed it back into Lyra's shaking hand before closing her fingers around it. Keep it, he said quietly. Lyra stared at him in confusion. The warmth of the crystal against her palm felt unreal after days of cold metal floors and empty stomachs. I cannot pay you back, she whispered. The human shrugged slightly. Good thing I did not ask. The tallest hunter took another slow step forward. That item belongs to House Vane Property Archives. His eyes shifted toward Lyra beneath her soaked hood. Which means she does too. The words hit harder than the cold. Lyra lowered her eyes instinctively, fingers tightening around the necklace. The human finally turned toward them. His expression did not change. Funny, he said calmly. Because she looks like a person to me. A few nearby vendors quietly backed away from their stalls. On Orion Port, people survived by avoiding trouble before trouble noticed them. The hunter's jaw flexed slightly. This is station business. Walk away. The human picked up the bowl of stew and handed it carefully to Lyra instead. Heat radiated through the metal container into her frozen hands. The smell alone nearly made her dizzy. You should eat before it gets cold, he said softly. Lyra hesitated. Nobody had spoken to her like that in a very long time. Not like she mattered. Not like she still deserved kindness. The hunter took another step. Then the human finally looked at him fully. Tired blue eyes. Calm. Unimpressed. Dock security is too. Corridors east, he said. You really want paperwork tonight? A flicker of irritation crossed the hunter's face. Orion Port was many things, but official investigations were expensive, slow, and dangerous for everyone involved. Especially bounty hunters operating without proper station permits. The silence stretched again. Somewhere overhead, another cargo freighter thundered through the docking lanes hard enough to shake loose rust flakes from the ceiling beams. Finally, the hunter exhaled sharply through his nose. This is not over. Most things are not, the human replied. The three figures disappeared back into the crowd moments later, swallowed by neon lights and drifting steam. Only then did Lyra realize her entire body had been trembling. The human turned back toward the vendor. Add water filters and protein packs too. The vendor frowned. That will clean out half your credits, Ethan. Then I guess I am eating cheap this week. Ethan. The name settled strangely in her thoughts. Human names always sounded so short compared to the flowing syllables of the core worlds. Ethan collected the supplies into an old canvas satchel before glancing toward her untouched stew. If you pass out in the middle of the market, somebody else is going to try saving you, he said. Trust me, I am the better option. Against her own instincts, Lyra took the first bite. The stew was too salty, too hot, cheap ingredients floating in oily broth. It was the best thing she had tasted in months. Ethan noticed the way her hands shook around the bowl, but politely pretended not to. That small mercy somehow hurt more than pity would have. Around them, the market noise slowly returned. Vendors resumed shouting prices. Machinery groaned through distant docking bays. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed before being swallowed by static-filled station announcements overhead. But Lyra barely heard any of it anymore, because for the first time since arriving on Orion Port, nobody was looking at her like something that could be bought. The rain had weakened to a cold metallic drizzle by the time Ethan led her away from the marketplace. Orion Port never truly slept. Even near midnight, the lower docking corridors pulsed with flickering signs, humming generators, and exhausted workers dragging cargo crates across oil-stained floor panels. Lyra stayed several steps behind him, clutching the canvas satchel tightly against her chest while the crystal necklace remained hidden beneath her damp sleeves. Every instinct told her this was dangerous. Men did not spend credits on strangers without wanting something in return, especially human men. She watched Ethan carefully as they moved through the crowded station tunnels. He walked with the heavy exhaustion of somebody used to long shifts and little sleep. His gray work jacket smelled faintly of burnt copper and machine oil, and one of his gloves had been patched so many times the original material was barely visible anymore. Nothing about him matched the stories she had heard growing up in the core systems. Humans were supposed to be ambitious, aggressive, reckless creatures who expanded across the galaxy faster than diplomacy could contain them. Yet this one looked more tired than dangerous. They descended two rusted maintenance stairwells before reaching a quieter section of the station where the lights buzzed overhead with uneven power flow. A cleaning drone rolled past them, spraying recycled water across the floor, while old station advertisements flickered weakly along the walls. Ethan finally stopped outside a narrow steel door marked Bay 14C. He pressed his wrist against the scanner panel. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss followed immediately by the smell of heated metal and engine coolant. The workshop inside was small but organized. Spare ship parts lined the walls in carefully labeled containers, while half-disassembled engine components rested across work tables beneath hanging utility lights. An old portable heater rattled softly near the far corner, fighting against the station cold with limited success. Lyra remained near the entrance. "You repair ships?" she asked cautiously. Ethan dropped the supply satchel onto a cluttered table. "Mostly things people cannot afford to replace." He glanced back toward her. "Door locks from the inside if that helps." The statement caught her off guard. No smile. No hidden meaning. Just information. She stepped farther inside slowly while the door sealed behind them with a heavy metallic clunk. For the first time in days, the station noise became distant enough for her own heartbeat to feel loud again. Ethan pulled 2 metal bowls from a cabinet and poured steaming stew from a heating unit near the workbench. "Sit wherever you want," he said. "Just avoid the red toolbox unless you enjoy electrical fires." Lyra lowered herself carefully onto a storage crate near the heater. Warm air brushed against her soaked clothes, making her realize how cold she had truly become. Her eyes drifted across the workshop until they landed on a framed photograph sitting crooked beside a stack of repair manuals. A woman stood beside Ethan in the picture beneath bright sunlight somewhere planetside. Both of them were smiling. The image looked painfully out of place inside the dim industrial room. Ethan noticed her staring and quietly turned the frame face down without explanation. Silence settled between them after that. Not awkward, just heavy. Lyra accepted the bowl carefully when he handed it to her. Steam curled upward between them while distant cargo sirens echoed faintly through the station hall. "You should sleep here tonight," Ethan said finally. "The hunters will still be searching the market district." Lyra tightened slightly around the bowl. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan leaned against the workbench, rubbing tired, grease-stained fingers across his jaw before answering. "Because nobody should have to trade pieces of themselves just to eat." His voice stayed calm, but something old and worn flickered briefly behind his eyes before disappearing again. Lyra looked down at the glowing necklace hidden beneath her hands. He still had not asked where it came from. Somehow that frightened her more than the bounty hunters did. The station lights dimmed automatically at 2 a.m. as Orionport shifted into low-power cycle. Half the workshop fell into shadow while the old heater continued rattling beside the wall with stubborn determination. Outside the sealed bay door, distant cargo alarms echoed through the docking levels like tired mechanical wails calling through fog. Lyra sat awake on the narrow maintenance cot Ethan had cleared for her near the back of the workshop. Sleep refused to come. Every unfamiliar sound made her shoulders tighten instinctively. Metal creaks, passing footsteps, pressure valves hissing somewhere deep inside the station walls. Years of survival had trained her body to expect danger whenever things became quiet. Across the room, Ethan worked beneath the exposed engine housing of a small transport shuttle suspended on repair braces. Sparks flashed briefly beneath the machine, while soft instrumental music played through an old speaker mounted near his toolbox. He had not asked her any more questions after dinner. No demands, no bargains, no curiosity sharp enough to feel dangerous. Somehow that unsettled her more than interrogation would have. Lyra pulled the blanket tighter around herself while watching him from across the dim workshop. His movements were slow with exhaustion, but careful, precise. One hand steadied a diagnostic scanner, while the other adjusted damaged wiring inside the engine compartment. The workshop smelled of heated copper and recycled air filters. Human environments always carried stronger physical scents than core world facilities. Less sterile, more alive. Ethan suddenly glanced toward her without looking surprised to find her awake. "The heater stops making that noise after 20 minutes, he said calmly. "Eventually your brain gives up fighting it." Lyra blinked softly. "I was not listening to the heater." "Then you are overthinking." He tightened another connector beneath the engine housing. "That usually keeps people awake too." A faint smile almost touched her face before disappearing again. Ethan climbed down from the repair platform with a slight wince that suggested old injuries somewhere beneath his jacket. He grabbed 2 steaming cups from a compact brewer near the workbench and carried one toward her. "Tea," he said. "Not great tea, but still technically tea." Lyra accepted the warm cup carefully. The ceramic heat spread slowly into her cold fingers. She studied the dark liquid suspiciously before taking a cautious sip. Bitter, smoky, slightly sweet afterward. "Strange. You hate it," Ethan observed. "I do not hate it," she replied politely. My species simply does not consume liquids that taste like burned machinery. Ethan laughed quietly under his breath for the first time since she met him. The sound surprised both of them a little. It changed his entire face for a moment, softening something tired beneath the constant weight behind his eyes. Lyra looked away first. Silence settled again, but lighter this time. Outside the workshop, thunder rolled faintly through the station hull as another electromagnetic storm moved across the docking sector. Ethan leaned against the nearby workbench, cradling his own cup between grease-stained hands. "You can stay here until the storm cycle passes," he said after a while. "Most hunters avoid lower dock sweeps during heavy interference." Lyra lowered her eyes toward the steam curling from her cup. "You speak as if you have dealt with hunters before." Ethan shrugged once. "Orion Port teaches everybody eventually." She studied him carefully through the dim light. "You still have not asked about the necklace." Ethan remained quiet for several seconds. Then he took a slow sip from his cup before answering. "If somebody wants to tell you who they are, they will." His voice stayed low and steady. "If they do not, pushing usually makes them disappear." The words landed deeper than he probably intended. Lyra tightened her grip slightly around the necklace hidden beneath the blanket. Back in the core systems, information was currency. Secrets were leverage. Trust was weakness. Yet this exhausted human mechanic treated privacy like something sacred instead of profitable. The realization left an unfamiliar ache somewhere beneath her ribs. For the first time in many months, Lyra found herself wondering what kind of life could create a man who still believed kindness should not come with ownership. Lyra woke to the sound of metal scraping against metal and the faint smell of overheated circuits. For one disoriented second, panic rushed through her body before memory slowly returned. Orion Port. The workshop. Ethan. Pale artificial morning light leaked through the narrow overhead vents while station announcements echoed faintly beyond the walls in distorted static. Docking lane 17 now open for outbound cargo traffic. Somewhere nearby, a generator coughed hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. Ethan was already awake. He stood near the main work table wearing a dark thermal shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, while diagnostic screens flickered blue across his tired face. One side of the dismantled shuttle engine lay open before him like exposed machinery organs, wires glowing softly beneath hanging utility lamps. Lyra remained still beneath the blanket for a moment, quietly watching him. There was something strangely peaceful about the way humans worked. Her people valued elegance and precision above all things. Human labor felt different, rougher, physical, honest. Ethan tightened a bolt with a manual wrench instead of using the automated calibrator sitting beside him. "If you stare any harder," he said without looking up, "the engine is going to get self-conscious." Lyra blinked. "How did you know I was awake?" "Because the heater stopped rattling 5 minutes ago, and you started breathing differently." He finally glanced toward her with faint amusement hiding beneath the exhaustion. "Turns out humans are not the only predators with decent hearing." She sat up slowly, brushing silver-blue strands of damp hair behind one pointed ear. The workshop still carried warmth from the old heater, though the air smelled strongly of machine oil now. Ethan slid a small plate across the table toward her. Toasted protein bread and a sliced orange fruit she did not recognize. "Breakfast," he said. "Before you ask, yes, it tastes better than the tea." Lyra stepped closer carefully. "You continue feeding strangers very confidently for someone living in a repair bay." Ethan shrugged once. "The station already overcharges me for oxygen. Food barely changes the math." She studied him quietly while taking a cautious bite. The bread was warm and surprisingly soft. Real food again, not emergency ration paste or recycled nutrient bars. Ethan returned to the shuttle engine while sparks flashed briefly beneath his tools. "So," he said casually, "what exactly did you do to make half the lower district nervous over one necklace?" Lyra froze slightly. Ethan noticed immediately. "Forget I asked," he added calmly. "Bad habit." She lowered the bread slowly. "No," she said after a moment. "You deserve some truth at least." The workshop became quiet except for the low hum of machinery. Lyra looked down at the glowing crystal resting against her collarbone beneath the loose station clothes Ethan had found for her earlier. "The necklace belonged to my mother," she said softly. "It carries our family identification signature." Ethan leaned back against the workbench, listening without interruption. In the core systems, powerful houses encode inheritance records biologically. Bloodlines, ownership rights, access clearances. Her fingers tightened lightly around the crystal. Without this necklace, House Vane officially disappears. Ethan was silent for several seconds. Then he looked toward the engine again instead of the necklace. Sounds like a pretty expensive thing to trade for soup. Lyra let out a faint breath that almost resembled a laugh. You are the first person in months who looked at me before looking at the crystal. Ethan adjusted another wire connection carefully. Jewelry usually causes trouble. And people? She asked quietly. He paused just long enough for the silence to matter. People usually cause worse. The answer settled heavily between them. Before Lyra could respond, movement outside the workshop door caught Ethan's attention instantly. His posture changed with subtle sharpness. Not fear. Awareness. Someone had stopped outside Bay 14C. A shadow moved beneath the narrow floor gap. Then came 3 slow knocks against the steel door. The 3 knocks came again. Slow. Patient. The kind of knocking that assumed the door would eventually open. Lyra felt cold immediately despite the heater humming beside her. Ethan did not move toward the entrance right away. Instead, he calmly powered down the diagnostic screen beside the shuttle engine and wiped grease from his hands with an old cloth rag. Stay behind the divider, he said quietly. Lyra looked toward the thin metal storage partition near the back wall. Ethan, please. His voice remained calm, but the word carried enough weight that she obeyed without argument. She slipped behind the divider while Ethan walked toward the workshop entrance with steady footsteps. The steel door opened halfway with a hydraulic hiss before stopping against the security chain lock. Cold corridor air spilled into the room, carrying the distant smell of ozone and industrial coolant. The tallest bounty hunter stood outside wearing the same dark coat from the marketplace. 2 others remained farther back near the corridor junction. Morning, Ethan said flatly. You are difficult to find, the hunter replied. That usually means people are avoiding me correctly. The hunter's eyes moved past Ethan into the workshop interior. We are not here for trouble. Ethan leaned one shoulder casually against the doorframe. Funny. Most people who say that are exactly here for trouble. Silence stretched between them while distant station machinery vibrated softly through the floor. Lyra pressed one trembling hand against the necklace beneath her shirt. She could not see Ethan's expression from behind the divider, but she could hear how controlled his breathing remained. No panic. No aggression. Just exhaustion sharpened into caution. The girl belongs to House Vane Succession Claims, the hunter finally said. Several organizations are searching for her. Ethan shrugged lightly. Then I hope they have comfortable shoes. The hunter's patience thinned slightly. You do not understand what she is carrying. Ethan glanced back briefly toward the workshop before answering. No, I understand perfectly. That surprised Lyra more than anything else he had said since meeting her. Then you know the bounty attached to her identification crystal. The hunter reached slowly inside his coat and produced a small holographic projector. A glowing image appeared between them showing lines of scrolling station data beside Lyra's face. Ethan's jaw tightened faintly as the credit amount illuminated the corridor in pale blue light. It was enough money to buy an entire docking sector on Orion Port. Enough to leave the station forever. Enough to never repair broken cargo engines another day in his life. The hunter watched Ethan carefully. Turn her over peacefully, he said. Nobody needs complications. For several long seconds, Ethan said nothing. Lyra closed her eyes briefly behind the divider. There it was. The moment every act of kindness eventually reached. The price. Back in the core systems, loyalty lasted exactly as long as profit allowed it to survive. She had seen advisors betray families for less than half that amount. Seen bodyguards sell information that destroyed entire bloodlines. Nobody walked away from numbers like that. Nobody. Ethan finally exhaled quietly through his nose. You know what the problem with people like you is? The hunter frowned slightly. Excuse me. Ethan nodded toward the hologram still glowing between them. You keep showing me numbers like they explain why somebody matters. His voice stayed low. Tired. Honest. That girl was starving in a rainstorm holding the last thing her mother ever gave her. The workshop seemed suddenly quieter around them. You think I care how expensive she is? The hunter's expression hardened. Human compassion will not protect her forever. Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. Maybe not. Then his eyes lifted calmly toward the corridor camera mounted overhead. But station security tends to get interested when armed bounty crews threaten licensed mechanics before breakfast. One of the hunters farther down the hall shifted uneasily. Orion Port authorities ignored many things. Public bounty disputes inside registered repair sectors were not one of them. The tallest hunter stared at Ethan for another long moment before slowly deactivating the hologram. You are making this harder than necessary. Ethan folded his arms lightly across his chest. Story of my life. The hunter stepped backward into the corridor shadows. Eventually, she will have to tell you who she really is. Ethan glanced briefly toward the hidden divider behind him. That is her decision. The door sealed shut moments later with a heavy metallic thud. Silence filled the workshop again except for the faint rattle of the heater and Lyra's unsteady breathing. Ethan stood motionless for several seconds before rubbing one tired hand across his face. Well, he muttered softly to himself, there goes my peaceful week. For the next several hours, neither of them spoke much. Ethan returned to repairing the shuttle engine, while Lyra sat quietly near the heater pretending to read old shipping manifests from a storage crate beside the cot. But the atmosphere inside the workshop had changed. The walls suddenly felt thinner. Every sound outside Bay 14C carried new weight now. Passing footsteps, radio chatter drifting through corridor vents, cargo drones rolling overhead. Orion Port no longer sounded like background noise. It sounded like a place searching for her. Ethan worked longer than usual that evening. Lyra noticed the subtle signs, even if he never complained. The stiffness in his shoulders whenever he lifted heavy components. The way he occasionally paused to press one hand briefly against his ribs before continuing. Years of difficult labor had left permanent damage beneath the calm exterior he carried so casually. Yet he kept moving with quiet determination anyway. The workshop lights dimmed toward artificial evening cycle as rain hammered once more against the outer docking sectors. Ethan finally sealed the shuttle engine housing shut with a loud metallic click before stepping back with visible exhaustion. That should keep the piece of junk alive another 6 months, he muttered. Lyra glanced up from the manifests. You speak about machines the way doctors speak about dying patients. Ethan wiped grease from his hands. Difference is machines complain less. A faint smile touched her face again. It disappeared quickly when a sharp warning siren suddenly echoed through the station corridors outside. Both of them looked toward the ceiling immediately. Dock fire alert. The automated station voice announced overhead. Maintenance Sector 14 under temporary lockdown. Ethan frowned. That is too close. Before either of them could move, the workshop lights flickered violently. Once, twice. Then the entire room dropped into emergency red lighting as power fluctuations rolled through the station grid. Somewhere beyond the walls, people started shouting. Lyra rose instinctively from the cot. What is happening? Ethan moved quickly toward the control panel beside the entrance. Either the station wiring finally gave up, he said grimly, or somebody wants the security cameras offline. The answer came seconds later. Smoke began curling beneath the lower edge of the workshop door. Not thick yet, but growing. Lyra's pulse spiked instantly. Ethan swore softly under his breath before grabbing a portable extinguisher from the wall rack. He cracked the door open cautiously. Heat rushed inside immediately along with gray smoke and flashing emergency lights from the corridor outside. A small cargo loader burned near the junction 50 feet away, flames licking upward against the station walls while frightened workers hurried through the haze toward emergency exits. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That loader was not there this morning. Lyra stepped closer behind him. You think this was intentional? He looked toward the corridor camera mounted above the fire. The lens had been shattered. I think somebody is sending a message. More station alarms echoed overhead now, while automatic suppression systems hissed weak streams of foam across the corridor ceiling. Ethan stepped outside briefly to check the damage. Lyra remained near the doorway, watching him through the smoke-filled hallway beneath pulsing red emergency lights. He moved toward the burning loader with the extinguisher raised, helping two frightened maintenance workers pull scattered cargo crates away from the spreading heat. No hesitation. No concern for himself. Just immediate action. One of the workers stumbled when a metal storage rack collapsed nearby. Ethan grabbed the man instantly, pulling him safely backward before the rack struck the floor with a deafening crash that sent sparks skittering across the corridor panels. Lyra's breath caught sharply. The smoke thickened around him as he continued helping strangers evacuate equipment away from the growing fire. By the time station suppression drones finally arrived overhead, spraying white chemical foam through the corridor, Ethan's thermal shirt sleeves had been partially scorched black from the heat. He returned to the workshop coughing lightly, hair damp from suppression chemicals, and smoke clinging heavily to his clothes. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. You could have been hurt. Ethan set the empty extinguisher down near the wall with a tired shrug. Everybody could have. He rubbed one soot-covered hand across his face before noticing her expression. What? Lyra looked toward the corridor where frightened workers still rushed past beneath flashing emergency lights. Then back at him. Back home, status determined worth. Wealth determined mercy. Yet this exhausted human mechanic had just risked himself for complete strangers without expecting reward, reputation, or advantage. The realization hit her harder than fear ever had. Ethan noticed the way she kept staring and frowned slightly. You were doing that thing again. What thing? He gave a faint, tired smile. Looking at me like humans are confusing. Lyra lowered her eyes slowly toward the glowing necklace resting against her chest. Maybe, she whispered softly, they are. The fire alarms finally stopped sometime after midnight. Orion Port settled back into its usual exhausted rhythm, though the smell of smoke still lingered faintly through the ventilation system. Outside Bay 14C, maintenance crews welded replacement panels over damaged corridor sections, while cargo traffic resumed above the station in long streams of blinking lights. Inside the workshop, Ethan sat on a metal stool near the workbench, wrapping a fresh thermal band around his forearm. The skin beneath looked red from heat exposure, though he treated it with the same indifference he gave most injuries. Lyra stood nearby watching silently while the portable heater rattled beside them. You should let the station medic examine that, she said quietly. Ethan secured the bandage with his teeth before flexing his arm once. Station medics charge 300 credits to tell me I am tired. You are injured. Occupational hobby. Lyra exhaled softly through her nose. Human humor continued making absolutely no sense to her. Ethan leaned back against the workbench afterward. Exhaustion visible in every movement now that the adrenaline had faded. Smoke stains darkened one side of his shirt, while faint shadows sat permanently beneath his eyes. Yet somehow he still looked more concerned about the damaged corridor outside than himself. Lyra stepped closer slowly. Why did you do it? She asked. Ethan frowned slightly. Do what? Go back into the smoke for strangers. He looked genuinely confused by the question for a moment. Because they needed help. Even knowing people are searching for me here. Ethan shrugged lightly. The fire was still real. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than any dramatic speech could have. Back home, every action carried strategic value. Risk was measured, calculated, rewarded. But Ethan kept making choices based on something far less logical and far more dangerous. Compassion. Lyra lowered her gaze toward the glowing necklace resting in her hand. The crystal shimmered softly beneath the dim workshop lights like captured starlight trapped beneath glass. House Vane controlled trade routes across 9 systems once, she said quietly. Ethan looked toward her but did not interrupt. My family negotiated resource treaties between core worlds. Entire colonies depended on our shipping networks. Her fingers tightened slightly around the crystal. Then the syndicates moved against us. The workshop seemed quieter suddenly except for distant welding sparks crackling outside the bay walls. They bribed officials, turned our allies against us. By the time my mother realized what was happening, our fleets were already gone. Ethan remained completely still, listening with the same quiet patience he always carried. She gave me the necklace before she died, Lyra whispered. Every legal claim to House Vane exists inside this crystal now. Banking access, trade authority, inheritance records. A faint bitter smile touched her lips. Apparently that makes me valuable. Ethan looked at the necklace for several seconds before meeting her eyes again. Sounds exhausting. The answer startled an actual laugh out of her before she could stop it. Soft, brief, real. Ethan looked mildly proud of himself for almost 3 seconds before wincing slightly as he adjusted his injured arm. Lyra's smile faded immediately. You are hurt because of me. No, Ethan replied calmly. I am hurt because Orion Port builds electrical systems with the emotional stability of wet cardboard. Ethan, he sighed softly, recognizing the seriousness in her voice now. Look, he said quietly. People were going to come after you eventually whether I helped or not. His tired blue eyes held hers steadily beneath the dim light. At least this way you were not alone when it happened. Something inside her chest tightened painfully at those words. Not because they were dramatic, because he meant them so simply. Like staying beside somebody frightened was the most natural thing in the world. Slowly, Lyra stepped forward and held the glowing necklace out toward him with both hands. Ethan frowned immediately. What are you doing? Take it. Her voice trembled faintly now despite every effort to control it. The accounts attached to this crystal could buy your own ship, your own dock. You would never have to repair broken cargo engines again. Ethan stared at the necklace without reaching for it. Lyra, please. Her golden eyes finally met his fully. Vulnerable for the first time since he met her. Everyone else who helped me wanted something eventually. The workshop heater rattled softly between them, while distant station announcements echoed far outside the bay walls. Ethan looked down at the crystal glowing in her hands. Then slowly, gently, he closed her fingers back around it. I fed you because you were hungry, he said quietly. Not because I was buying you. The words broke something inside her completely. Lyra lowered her head suddenly as tears slipped silently down her face before she could stop them. And for once in her life, nobody asked her to hide them. 3 days later, Orion Port looked exactly the same. Cargo freighters still thundered through the docking lanes above the station like steel storms crossing the stars. Vendors still shouted prices beneath neon signs flickering through chemical rain. Somewhere in the lower districts, people still traded dignity for survival because hunger never cared about pride. But inside Bay 14C, something quieter had changed. The workshop heater continued rattling beside the wall with stubborn determination, while soft instrumental music drifted through the old speakers near Ethan's workbench. Half disassembled engine parts covered every available surface, and the air smelled faintly of machine oil, solder smoke, and warm soup. Lyra stood near the entrance watching Ethan argue with a damaged navigation panel that refused to cooperate. You are threatening the machine again, she observed. Ethan tightened another connector beneath the panel with visible annoyance. I am motivating it. Your motivational techniques seem ineffective. That is because this panel was manufactured by sadists. Lyra smiled despite herself and stepped farther inside, carrying 2 steaming bowls from the portable food heater. Ethan noticed immediately. You cooked. I followed the instructions written on the container. That does not answer the question. She rolled her eyes lightly before handing him one of the bowls. The movement felt strangely natural now, like she had belonged inside this workshop longer than a few days. Ethan accepted the soup carefully, still favoring his injured arm slightly despite pretending otherwise. Outside the bay door, welding sparks flashed across the corridor while station workers repaired the fire damage from earlier that week. Orion Port moved on quickly from disasters. Survival usually demanded it. Lyra sat beside the workbench while Ethan ate quietly across from her. The glowing necklace rested around her throat once more, no longer hidden beneath layers of fabric and fear. Ethan never mentioned it anymore, never stared at it, never treated her differently because of it. Somehow that mattered more than any promise ever could. The bounty crews stopped searching this sector yesterday, Ethan said eventually. Either they gave up or somebody higher up redirected them. Lyra traced one finger lightly along the edge of her bowl. They will come again eventually. Ethan shrugged once. Probably. You say that very calmly. He took another spoonful of soup before answering. Worrying early just means suffering twice. Lyra shook her head softly. Humans truly are strange creatures. Ethan pointed his spoon toward her, coming from the woman who tried trading a royal inheritance for street food. For a second, she looked offended. Then both of them laughed quietly at the same time. The sound lingered warmly inside the workshop beneath the hum of old machinery. Lyra lowered her gaze afterward, her expression softening slowly. Back home, she said quietly. People only stayed near me because they needed something from House Vane. Ethan remained silent, listening. Advisors wanted influence. Merchants wanted contracts. Even kindness usually came attached to negotiations. Her golden eyes lifted toward him across the dim workbench lights. You were the first person who looked at me and saw only someone hungry. Ethan leaned back slightly against the metal table, exhaustion still visible in every line of his face. Seems like a pretty important thing to notice. The station lights dimmed automatically into evening cycle while freighter engines rumbled faintly through the distant hull outside. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together inside the warm little repair bay surrounded by tools, damaged machinery, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary survival. Then Lyra reached slowly into her pocket and placed something onto the workbench between them. Ethan looked down. The crystal necklace glowed softly beneath the hanging workshop lights. Lyra, I know you will not take it, she interrupted gently. That is not why I placed it there. Ethan frowned slightly. Then why? Her eyes reflected the blue glow of the crystal as she looked at him across the cluttered table. Because for the first time since my world collapsed, she whispered softly. I do not feel like I need to carry it alone. Ethan stared at the necklace for several quiet seconds before slowly sliding a bowl of fresh soup toward her instead. Outside the workshop window, cargo ships disappeared one by one into the endless dark between stars. But inside Bay 14C, beneath flickering lights and the smell of heated metal, an exhausted human mechanic and a hunted alien girl shared dinner in silence. And somehow, in a galaxy where everything had a price, that silence felt priceless.